Hello and welcome to this video where we are going to answer the question, what constitutes a good executive assessment score? Hi, I'm Brett Etheridge, founder of Dominate Test Prep and the industry's leading executive assessment prep course. And if you're like a lot of my students, you've recently learned that you need to take the executive assessment as you're applying to business school, maybe an executive MBA, maybe a traditional MBA program. In fact, maybe leave a comment below and let me know why you're taking the executive assessment. What type of program are you shooting for? But you're wondering, like, what's a good score? How do I know what to shoot for? That's an important question, right? We need to set goals for ourselves. We need to know what constitutes a good score. My son, he's learning to shoot a BB gun. And so I set up 10 cans, 10 aluminum cans on the fence. And I said, see how many shots it takes for you to knock down all 10 cans. And his question to me was, well, what's good? Like, what should I be shooting for? Well, obviously, if he can do all 10 cans in 10 shots, that's 100% accuracy, that's pretty good. But what if it takes him 12 shots? What if it takes him 15 shots? He's only 12 years old, so maybe what if it takes him 20 shots? Maybe that's still good, right? So we have to have some sort of frame of reference. And that's what I want to give you here. I'm going to give you sort of a primer on how executive assessment scoring works, and then 3 ways to think through answering the question of what's a good score. And I'm actually going to start by suggesting that that's actually not the question you should be asking anyway. The question isn't what's a good score, as if there's some sort of objective black and white, like here's the answer to that question. Although I'm going to show you some numbers that may give you a better idea of what generally is considered a good executive assessment score. But I think the better question to ask is, what score do I need to get into my target program? And that score might be higher than what some students are shooting for, might be lower than what some other students are shooting for. It might be a roughly average score. And in fact, let's jump into it. My very first point when you're thinking about what's a good executive assessment score is that average is okay when it comes to the executive assessment. And this is a hard concept for students to sort of latch onto, executive assessment students, because we're so driven, right? You're probably a type A personality. I know I am. You're shooting to go to business school, which is a very selective type of endeavor anyway. You're used to excelling in school and anything else that you're going after in your life. And you're saying, wait a second, but Brett's telling me it's okay to be average? Why? Well, because most schools right now, like in the landscape of graduate business education, the schools that are requiring the executive assessment, most of them only want you to get an average score, which is what, by the way? So an average score right now is 150, right? So let's actually talk about executive scoring just a moment. And so when I say it's okay to be average, yeah, 150 is an average score, but that's all they need. Does that make sense? And your goal is to get in, and you're thinking, well, wait a second, Brett, is the upper end of the scale 200? Like, shouldn't I be going after a 200? Well, it'd be great if you got a 200, but a 150 will get you in. But the nature of the executive assessment, at least as far as admissions offices currently use the exam, is that it's really a threshold exam. There's one school that literally told one of my students that they view it as a check mark on the application. Did you get your 150 or not? Check. Like, hey, but I got a 160. Don't care. All we cared was that you got a 150. Does it make sense? Well, I got a 149. We kind of wanted you to have a 150. We'll actually let you in with a 149. Well, for that student, a 149 is a good score. Does that make sense? So that's the better question. And I would actually encourage you, after watching this video, reach out. Go to the websites of the schools that you're going to be applying to and find out what their expectations are. And that becomes for you a good score. Does it make sense? Now, I do have some other thoughts. I am going to give you some more concrete numbers, but that's really my take-home message here. And it's probably not what you were hoping to get when you clicked to watch this video, but it's the message you might need to hear, right? You were maybe hoping I was going to give you a specific number to shoot for. No, the school will give you the specific number to shoot for. Does that make sense? Let me give you a quick rundown, though, of executive assessment scoring in case you're not all that familiar with it. They tell us officially on the website that the range is between 100 and 200, but that's not really true. And the reason is because the way the scoring algorithm works is that they start at 120 and add your raw score on the 3 sections of the exam. The 3 sections of the exam being integrated reasoning, verbal reasoning, and quantitative reasoning, right? And see, so each of those sections gives you a raw score from 0 to 20, right? So 0 to 20. So let's say, for example, you got a roughly average score on each of those 3 sections, which would be a 10. So if you manage to get a 10 on all 3 of the sections, 10 plus 10 plus 10 is 30, plus the 120, that gives you your 150. That's how the scoring works, right? And so that's, in theory, what you would be shooting for if that is your goal. Is that average? Yes, but that's okay for you, maybe. Now, there are some schools who are going to expect a higher score, so let's talk about that. But as of this recording, 150 is an average score. It's the 50th percentile score, right? So if we think about the percentile rankings, half the students score higher than 150, half the students score lower than 150. So that's it. That's what's going on. Average is okay when it comes to the executive assessment. Now, in practice, the range then would be from 120, in theory, all the way up to, if you got a 20 on all the sections, right? 20, 40, 60 plus your 120, the upper range in theory would be all the way up at 180. But even that is not the real range of scores on the executive assessment. In practice, it appears that by all anecdotal evidence, and in fact anything that we've heard from the GMAC, the makers of the exam, is that the lowest score really that you can get on any section is a 2. Right? So 2 times 2 times 2 times 3, like 6, plus 120. Really, the lower range seems to be 126, and the upper range really seems to be 18. I guess that shouldn't be a slash. That should be like 2 to 18 is sort of the range. And I think they've built in maybe a little bit of padding, so as more people take the exam and they could sort of expand the range as the test grows. It's still a fairly new exam. That's sort of just my theory on why the range is really 2 to 18 instead of 0 to 20, which is what they say regardless. So 18 times 3 plus 120 would put you up here actually at like 174. So that really sort of seems to be the range on the executive assessment. And so obviously if you can push up towards the 174, that's obviously an excellent score. Not doing very, very well if you're at a 126, but let me put a few more numbers to it and talk about point number 2. So average is okay, but every point matters. Oop, my little sticky notes aren't doing well. Every point matters. The range of scores is really tight on the executive assessment. And there aren't a lot of questions per section. I'm not going to get into the format of the exam here, but really 1 or 2 more right answers has a pretty big impact on your score. In fact, if you can just get up to a 153, all of a sudden now you're in the 75th percentile. It's a pretty big jump for just 3 more points. Every point helps. Does it make sense? On the downside, if you go down to a 146, so not quite evenly spread, just in terms of how averages work, but 146 puts you at about the 25th percentile. And so that gives you a sense of most students are scoring somewhere between a 146 and a 153. And so that's a good score, right? I didn't say what's a great score. You didn't ask what's a great score, and I would say a really good score would be anything higher than 153. In fact, I'm thinking about some of the top executive MBA programs, some of the top named schools that you're probably familiar with. Wharton's executive MBA program, for example, a handful of others. They've told my students that they're really expecting a 155 or higher, right? So 155 would really be considered a good score. I've had some schools tell my students that they'd prefer something closer to 160. But nothing really higher than that. You know, they have not published percentile rankings, like full percentile rankings the way they have for some of the other standardized tests, like the GMAT and GRE and so forth, that have like decades of track record and so forth. So they might publish them at some point in the future, but like I don't have the nuances for what a 160 is, but my guess is a 160 puts you in the 90th percentile or higher. That's a really good score, a 160. But again, I go back to point number one. Okay, fine, Brett just said 160 is a really, really good score. I want a 160. Yeah, but the schools you're applying to only want a 150. It's a check mark on the application. Does that make sense? So I really want you to kind of internalize that understanding, and yet now you have sort of a better sense of 146 to 153 is a good score. 146 may not get you into your program though, in which case it's not considered a good score. It's like a bad score because it didn't get you into where you want to go. And then anything higher than 153 is just a really good score. Currently, you can head to the GMAC's official website and see if they update any of the percentile rankings and things like that. But these are the numbers we know as of now. And I do want to emphasize though the final point, which is beware of comparing yourself to anybody else. One of my favorite quotes by Theodore Roosevelt, the American president, is that comparison is the thief of joy. And if you go into the executive assessment concerned about how everybody else is doing and how you compare to other people, it is going to rob you of any sort of joy that you might have through the experience, or even the joy of the score that you end up getting. I remember back in college, or before college, in high school, when I was taking the SAT to get into college. Maybe you took the SAT or ACT, but it's such a cutthroat type of experience, right? And a lot of other graduate exams are the same way, like the GMAT. People are fighting for every last point. They want to get the 90th percentile, the 98th percentile. Like they're fighting for spots at Harvard and Stanford and MIT. And that's just not the way the executive assessment is. Like I said, it's more of a threshold type of exam. So let's take a deep breath. Let's remember what good means when it comes to an executive assessment score, and also realize that I don't want to compare myself to anybody else. I remember I got my SAT score back, and it was a really good SAT score. Right? I ended up going to Duke University, which is a top undergraduate university, and they expect high SAT scores, and I didn't get the highest score. In fact, my score wasn't even really as high as most of the friends on my freshman dorm, but it got me into Duke. But I'll never forget when I got my score back, and I was sort of instantaneously happy, pleasantly surprised. I had studied a lot, and I had done pretty well, and I found out my best friend got a higher score than me. And it instantaneously robbed me of any joy I had around my SAT score. Like I had about 1 hour's worth of excitement until I found out what my buddy got. And all of a sudden I started comparing myself. How did he do better than me? Does that mean he's smarter than me? But he wasn't applying to Duke. He went to somewhere else entirely. He needed his score for his school. I needed my score for my school. I got into my dream school anyway. That should have been all I was concerned about. I should have been ecstatic, happy. And I have since circled back to being proud of my score and happy that I went to Duke and all of those types of things. But just don't worry, like put blinders on, right? Buckle down, study for this thing, figure out what your target score is, and let's go to work. Let's roll up our sleeves, let's get to work. And when you get that score that gets you in, and you're in grad school with other people, like who cares what they did on the executive assessment, right? You're still in the same classroom as them, right? It's not like your professor is going to give them a little higher grade on this test because they had a higher executive assessment score. No, nobody even knows your score. Does that make sense? So it's a little bit of a means to an end. I hope you're coming away from this video with maybe a different shift in your mindset as you're evaluating what constitutes a good executive assessment score. And hopefully you have some tangible, concrete numbers now to think about and work with. And oh, by the way, if you need help getting that score, if you need to push up towards a 153, a 155, maybe even a 160, depending on the school that you're shooting for, we can help. Head over to dominatetestprep.com/executive-assessment for our complete executive assessment prep course that will teach you everything. Content and strategies and time management and practice questions, everything you need to get, whether it's a 150. I've had students who literally were told they only needed a 145. We can help you get a 145. We can also help you get the 160 plus. We've got you covered. Head over to dominatetestprep.com. But I am here in the questions below answering questions. So if you have them, let me know how I can help you and empower you to dominate the executive assessment. I'll sign off for now and see you in a future video and hopefully in our course. Take care, everyone. Good luck, and we'll talk to you again soon.